I have the honor today of visiting with Audrey and James, who are going to be performing in a few hours here at St. George's. I hope to spend maybe 10 minutes with the two of them to get to know them a little bit better and to understand their story that will go out on a video at some point to our hopefully growing number of friends and admirers. And so let me ask you a few questions, but first I would like to say that I'm not really, in some ways, the person to be doing this interview because my musical knowledge is somewhat limited. And I would say, in all honesty, that your resumes are just very intimidating. They're just, it's just like, really? You know, how can this be that we're lucky enough to have somebody of this caliber and this much experience around the country and Canada and lots of other places down here in little St. Mary's County. It's just wonderful to have both of you here. And I'm glad we have this beautiful day to welcome you and
Spectacular.
show you some of the reasons why there are people down here in St. Mary's County. My name is Jeff Clark. I'm one of the founders of this Music from Poplar Hill series, and my tie-in is my long-term partnership romance with Jo Ricks, the woman for whom this musical series is named. And we've been working on this concept for about a year and a half. And the origin of this concept is something that I borrowed after a visit to Key West, Florida, where some friends of mine were involved in an effort at St. Paul's Episcopal Church down there. And they have an ongoing musical series.
I wonder if that's the series we played on.
Yeah.
We played in Key West years ago.
Well, I'm sure it's the same because it's such a small
And it was in a
place.
church, yeah.
And it's like this. It's not religious music. It's not really much to do with the church, except they provide the structure and the
That is so common.
administrative support.
That's so common with classical music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time playing in churches.
When I was there a year and a half ago, I suppose, there were members of the National Symphony of the Netherlands who were playing, and I just couldn't believe how good they were. And so that's kind of how this all got started. So it's great to have you here and have you part of this. I just wanted to say that both of our guests have really nationally known and recognized careers. They were acclaimed performers on the violin and on the piano. Just a few highlights. Audrey has performed with the Juilliard Orchestra at Alice Tully Hall in New York. She's the first prize winner of the Mozart International Competition, affiliated with the University of Maryland. James on the violin also has played at Alice Tully Hall, Carnegie Hall, has been involved in the Arts Center at the University of Maryland for quite some time. We are really just very honored to have both of you here, and I know everybody's looking forward to a great evening. I wonder if you could tell us just a little, how did you get started? How old or young were you when you knew that music was going to be the center of your life?
I grew up in a very musical family in Canada, on the prairies in Saskatchewan. I grew up on a farm, actually. But my parents were both very fine amateur musicians, and it was not their profession, but they were very passionate about music, and it was just understood that all of us kids would have music lessons, piano lessons. There was a very, very fine teacher in our little tiny town, so we were very fortunate to have a good teacher nearby. And I started piano when I was 6 years old, and that's actually all I ever wanted to do. I never wanted to do anything else ever. I just wanted to play the piano. And I don't know why. I have no idea. But from that age, people would ask me what I was going to do. And I said, well, I'm going to play the piano and I'm going to be in a sorority. And because my mom was in a professional sorority. I never did the sorority part, but I did do the piano part. And you?
Yeah, also musical family. 5 kids, and evening entertainment on a Saturday night was gathering around the piano and singing Purcell's Come Ye Sons of Art. And I didn't know as soon as Audrey did, or as young an age, that it was going to be my profession. In fact, maybe not until I was almost in my 20s did I commit. I mean, I did spend those early years that one has to spend practicing many hours a day, because you can't develop the skill you need without that at a young age. But even so, when I was at Juilliard pre-college, some people were planning on being musicians, other people were applying to Harvard and Yale, and they were studying their calculus textbooks during the breaks in orchestra rehearsals. So, not everybody who is really dedicating themselves to developing that skill at a young age is necessarily going to decide to do it professionally.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Woodstock, New York. Yes.
We've heard of that.
We've heard of that, yes. Yeah.
Did you go?
It was just a little bit before my time. I remember being gotten out of bed in the middle of the night to see the astronauts walk on the moon.
Oh, yeah.
And I was, I think, 5 and a half. So,
A little young for Woodstock.
yeah. Also, some people know Woodstock didn't actually happen in Woodstock.
Right.
It was a little ways away, so we didn't have people running across our lawn.
Well, I was old enough to be there, but fortunately I was not, because all of that mud and all of those people, no, that's... So, as an introduction to my next question, I'll tell you a very quick story. Jo, my wife, took piano lessons on and off all of her life. She loved to play, but she was really not very accomplished. But her last attempt to improve her piano skills, she took lessons from an elderly, as in ancient, Russian emigre called Professor Tatorsky. And I don't recall his first name, but he was old enough to have served in the Tsar's Navy in the First World War. And he was an intimate friend of Rachmaninoff. Now, I'm assuming neither of you knew Rachmaninoff.
Not intimately, not personally.
But what mentor? Who were your mentors? Who was the person or people who really made you galvanize your energy around playing the piano or the violin?
I guess when in classical music, the very, very important relationship is the relationship between the teacher and the student, because it's many, many, many years, decades of one-on-one lessons. And so those teacher mentors become just so much a part of your life. And I think that for me, my 3 main teachers, my teacher I had when I was a young girl, and then the teacher I had in college, who himself had gone to Juilliard and Eastman, but luckily got a job in Saskatchewan and ended up teaching at the university there. And then my Juilliard teacher, Herbert Stesson, I would say were my main influences. And then beyond that, growing up on the farm, we didn't have a lot of live concerts that we could go to. But my dad had this incredible collection of jazz LPs, long playing records. And he was a huge jazz fan. He was an amateur drummer himself. He had a band in my town. He had the dance band that played at all the weddings in my town. and when he wasn't farming. And I grew up listening to Count Basie and Duke Ellington and all of those really just fantastic recordings that he had. In addition to CBC radio, which, my mom was the classical person, so we were always either listening to CBC radio or the jazz records. And so that was also a huge influence. And then when I finally did move to New York, straight from Saskatchewan, my mom did this incredibly generous thing for me, among many generous things that she did, which is that she said, if you want to go to any concert you want to go to, she gave me a copy of her credit card, and I could put it on. I could put those things. I could put concerts on her credit card. So I just lived in Carnegie Hall, and back in those days, it was not expensive. You could get a balcony seat in Carnegie Hall for $15 or $20. Yeah, I mean, I went to everything, and yeah. So those are my main.
I guess the other thing about classical music is we do a lot of genealogy. Like some of the people Audrey has mentioned, her teacher in Canada studied with Cecile Genhardt and Rosina Levine, and those are people that you could eventually trace back to Czerny, whom you could trace back to Beethoven. You can do this kind of fun genealogy of who taught who, leading back to yourself.
Sort of a variation on the Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
Yes.
6 degrees.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. I actually studied violin with my mom for about 3.5 years. And that was where I got my start. And my dad was also a big influence on me. He told me which LPs to listen to. And he was an amateur pianist and got me really hooked on piano playing. And I almost loved the piano more than the violin. And it wasn't really in the cards for me to become a pianist, but I married one instead. It's still, piano music is still what I listen to for, I guess, spiritual nourishment. If it's a long car trip, I'm listening to Chopin and Bach on the piano more than I'm going to listen to violin. But anyway, my mom had studied with Louise Behrend, who taught at the Juilliard Pre-College. And so I eventually went to study with Miss Behrend. And that's another thing about classical music. Even when you grow up, you still call your teachers Miss Behrend. You don't start calling them Louise. And she had studied with Louis Persinger, who had taught some names you might have heard of, like Yehudi Menuhin, who was a great, one of the great icons of the 20th century. And she had wonderful stories to tell about Persinger and his sense of sound and his sense of technique. I'll be telling a little story tonight about how one of the pieces we're playing tonight connects me to my musical grandfather, so to speak, because I studied, when I went to the Juilliard College division, I studied with Joseph Fuchs, who had been concertmaster of the Cleveland Orchestra and a very prominent soloist. And it was very exciting for me to study with him.
I told Eliza a while ago that I would have much rather been a concert pianist than the President of the United States. But she didn't think that was remarkable. She thought that was obvious. Such a much better way to spend your life.
Well, isn't there a story about Paderewski? Because I think the pianist Paderewski got into politics and rose pretty high and attained some very high position. And one of his musician colleagues said, "What a come down."
Precisely.
Your story about your wife's ancient teacher is actually very, very common in classical music also. It seems that classical music teachers just seem to just teach and teach and teach. Like they don't retire. And yeah, it's kind of a time-honored tradition.
This gentleman was, again, very old, and he was very hard of hearing. But that didn't really slow him down because he could see how she was touching the keyboard, and and he would correct her, but not so much what he heard, but what he saw. So, one of the major elements of this Music from Poplar Hill series is the workshop with the school kids who were involved in music here in the county school system. So I hope that is something that is going to make your trip down here more rounded and more satisfying. It's
I
part
fully
of
expect it will, yes.
Yeah, that's one of our
it's
favorite
something we're
things.
very excited about, and the last one 2 weeks ago.
It's very impressive how many students that there are lined up.
Great reaction
Yeah,
from
yeah.
the participants, and so I think that's going to be a highlight for you tomorrow morning. But so will tonight, and I think you will see a lot of enthusiasm from people. There is a shortage of cultural outlets down here and things to do, and when something of this caliber comes along, there's a lot of appreciation. So I think you'll see some real enthusiasm from the people in the church and out here on the lawn. And I am certainly looking forward to it. And I hope we have adequately thanked you for putting this time on your calendar and making the trip down here.
Well, it's
We're very grateful to
it's
be
our
here. Yeah.
our honor
Yeah.
and privilege.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you so very much for being
Thank you,
part of
Jess.
this. And again, I hope your time down here is something that you will appreciate and look back to with fond memories for a long time. And thank you.